New Denver Broncos head coach Sean Payton says Broncos Country should be rooting for the Eagles in the Super Bowl over Kansas City. As the Payton era begins, what were some of the main takeaways from his introductory press conference? You get that and much more from the South Stands to the end zone on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos Country? Welcome into a brand new episode, Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Sean Payton was officially introduced on Monday as the team's next head coach. He gave his thoughts on what the team will look like, what he's looking for from players, and the standard he wants to set going forward for the Broncos organization. Thank you so much, Broncos Country, for tuning in and making Locked on Broncos your first listen of the day, every single day, free and available everywhere you get your podcast in audio format, or whether you're watching on YouTube. Do us a favor, hit that subscribe or that follow button so you never miss out on a day's worth of Denver Broncos news, content, coverage, and more. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by my co-host, my good friend, Sayre Bedinger. He's the site expert, predominantlyorange.com. Sayre, the Sean Payton era has officially begun here in Denver. His introductory press conference on Monday went off without a hitch. We got to learn a lot. There was a lot of introspective, thoughts from Sean Payton, a lot of reflection on maybe how things have evolved through him in his coaching career and why he ultimately chose Denver. And I tell you what, the excitement is there for everybody in Broncos Country. Fans were really excited as well. What were your initial takeaways from his introductory press conference?
Well, it was a really quick 45 or so minutes, which started off with Greg Penner, the Broncos CEO, representing the ownership group up there, talking about how we wanted to get this right, and we did. He thanked Broncos Country for their patience, the long process, and he said this, Cody. He said, we have the perfect coach in Sean Payton. And I think after listening to the press conference, I couldn't agree more. You got a guy talking about putting a stereo in the locker room for post-game victory, and you got him talking about ticket sales. You got him talking about the size of towels. You got him talking about all these different things, which just indicated to me, Cody, that man, he has a great big picture view. You can tell. I know he wasn't asked this specifically. What was the vision, for the Denver Broncos that you pitched to the team? But you could kind of see pieces of it throughout this press conference. You could kind of see what would sell this ownership group, which spent $400,000 to put a field in before the last game of the season. The attention to detail, that clearly resonated with Greg Penner and the ownership group. And I think from Sean Payton's perspective as well, to have an ownership group that cares about those little things, those details that add up to be very big over the course of the season. So, of course, there's some fun little comments that he made that we'll get into that I loved, and I loved hearing. I know Broncos Country did too, but I think first and foremost, the ownership group really just putting that stamp on there. We needed to get this right. We did. We found the perfect coach, and we have him. And I think after listening to him speak, you can't argue with it.
I think another thing I'll throw out there as well, and we'll dive in more in Broncos Country. Make sure as you're listening to this episode, or if you're watching along on YouTube, you share your thoughts on Sean Payton's introductory press conference. But the thing that stood out for me as well was how involved George Paton was in this entire process, right? And I think that's one of the important things you have to look at is everybody was talking about, George Paton is taking a back seat, and even Sean Payton himself had addressed some things like, there are a lot of narratives that I come in and I want to control everything. I'm this tyrant. He said that's not the case. Like, I don't know where you guys get that from, but I felt like he was very open about his interactions with George Paton. I mean, they spoke several times, consistently throughout the head coach search process. They spoke daily on the phone. And now since he's been in Dove Valley, he's been in his office. They've spent a lot of times in each other's office talking about things. And so the thing that I think gives me confidence, and I truly believe it, I believe it when Sean Payton says it, he and George Paton will be collaborative on so many things. And that's what Greg Penner ultimately wants for the franchise, because he knows if that system is there, if that foundation and culture between a general manager and a coach is present, they have a really good chance of building something special. And I tell you what, I'm excited to see Payton and Payton put in work here for the Broncos this upcoming season.
Peyton and Peyton, I love it. He mentioned too that his interactions early on with George Paton kind of reminded him of his interactions with Mickey Loomis, who, of course, Mickey was there in New Orleans before Sean Payton got there, and he's still there after. He's basically a Saints lifer at this point, Mickey Loomis is. So, I mean, he talked about how similar those guys are, how he became lifelong friends with Mickey Loomis. They're still friends, obviously, to this day. You gotta imagine, and I love that he brought up that I don't know where this thing about me being a tyrant came from, which, Cody, we know those rumors are, those were fabricated on Twitter about, well, Sean Payton's going to want to be the head coach and GM wherever he goes to be a head coach. That's why the Arizona Cardinals make the most sense. That's why such and such team make the Houston Texans or whoever else make more sense than the Broncos. Those are where those rumors really came from about him demanding like roster control. But I think there's nothing better. And he pointed this out. There's basically like this holy trinity of, the football heads in terms of when you're talking about the brain trust. You have the ownership, you have the head coach, and you have the front office. And Sean Payton talked about that, the importance of it, and how I think, George Paton is going to endear himself. They talked about how they hit it off, talking about UCLA when George Paton was there with Troy Aikman, and you start talking about Mike Zimmer, who obviously George Paton worked with in Minnesota, and then Sean Payton had known him from his time in Dallas. It's a small world in the NFL, and you got to have people that you work with that you trust, especially when you're talking about the brain trust that is ownership, front office, head coach. I think George Paton can be much more of an asset than anything else, than any sort of hindrance, I suppose, to what Sean Payton brings to the table in terms of his eye for talent and development and acquisition.
Well, so much of this will begin going forward as NFL free agency is approaching. This is the final week for Sean Payton. He has some obligations still with Fox and Phoenix. I'm flying out to Phoenix Monday night. I'm hoping to catch him while he's there. We'll see if we can get anything more out of him as well. Got to, we introduce ourselves afterwards. Got to hear a little bit more. And we'll dive into some comments we heard from Sean Payton, specifically regarding quarterback Russell Wilson. You'll get that on today's episode, Lockdown Broncos. This episode of the show is brought to you by our friends at Prize Picks. And with the Prize Picks app, you pick 2 to 6 players, and if they will go score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. Prize Picks is daily fantasy sports done right. These players will have a projection that's set by Prize Picks, and you simply choose whether or not they will have more or less than their Prize Picks projection. There's no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections that are available. So download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter promo code LOCKEDON at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. As we continue to go through some of our key takeaways from Sean Payton's introductory press conference on Monday at the UCHealth Training Center, just wanted to say thank you so much to everybody in Broncos Country for tuning in and making Lockdown Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. Like I said, you can get this podcast free and available everywhere you get your podcast in audio format, or if you prefer watching us, you can catch us every single day on YouTube. We appreciate you so much. We kind of talked about Sean Payton's introductory press conference. Throughout his presser, there were things that were thrown in there. He's asked questions about the offense, about Russell Wilson. There's also some things that happened in the post-media scrum, the informal introductions that we were able to have with Coach Payton on Monday in Dove Valley. First off, let's talk about really Sean Payton's discussion and emphasis, what he said about Russell Wilson from his perspective, because we all know he shared his insight as a member of Fox on various outlets this upcoming season about what he would do in particular. Today, he gave some insight on Russell Wilson. What did he have to say, and what were your takeaways on that, Sayre?
Yeah, I loved it. He kind of brought back a little bit of the, the song lyrics type of thing. Talked about you don't want to do karaoke for a song that you don't know, and those type of things. It was fun. It's fun to hear that kind of stuff. But he said, this is a quote directly from him, Cody, as I was kind of transcribing the presser. He said, I think the number one job for us as coaches in evaluating our players, what do they do really well? And then let's try to put them in those positions. At least that's a starting point to highlighting their strengths and minimizing their weaknesses. So you listen to him say something like that, and I think that it's clear, that wasn't the case before. And I think he made a couple of other comments, like, the karaoke comment kind of alludes to the fact that as he watched the 2022 Broncos, he could see that that wasn't necessarily the case. And we've heard that, right, from a number of different sources, that the Broncos obviously, and you don't even have to hear it, right? They ran the Nathaniel Hackett offense. They ran the Russell Wilson offense. Then Clint Kubiak is calling plays. Then Justin Outen is calling. There's 4 different offenses just right there, and you don't know what you're going to get week to week. So obviously you have a guy in Sean Payton who's now going to bring it all together, bring his vision to the table. And I think what we've been longing for more than anything is what he talked about, really maximizing the traits of your players and what they do well. Like he said, making sure those lyrics are available when you're doing the karaoke out there on the field.
I think another thing, too, is fans, right, have high expectations. This is big. Like, when the Broncos make big changes like this, I mean, these press conferences, they tend to have a little bit of a higher volume of magnitude to them when you look at it versus like some other organizations, because the tradition for this team is historic. It's built on the foundation of winning and being one of the most notable franchises in NFL history. And that's something that Sean Payton said that he expressed value in, that when he was going through his list of clubs that he was meeting with, this was something that stood out to him. And that Broncos ownership, George Paton, Condoleezza Rice, Rob Walton, they all made such a strong impression on him. Now it seems like the Broncos have, I don't see, in the way I say this, I don't want to sound like it's insulting, but I was going to say like an adult in the room at the head coaching position. Not to say that Nathaniel Hackett was an adult, and I know it comes across that's not a very great comment. Obviously, I'm not going to delete this here on the podcast, but I'm going to talk about it. It just seems like Sean Payton knows when it's business, right? And he's not going to be super buddy with his guys. He's going to relate to his guys. He's going to do things that encourage team building, team bonding, but it's not going to be, I'm your friend. It's, hey, it's football. We have to flip the switch. If we want to win, this is what we have to do. And Denver simply did not have that at the head coach position last year. As much as I like Nathaniel Hackett as a human being and as a coach, that dynamic simply wasn't there. But with that said, right, we talk about high expectations for this fan base there. I think a lot of fans are kind of on the standpoint of saying, hey, I'm just going to wait to see what they look like in the fall. But I like what this coach is saying, and I think Sean Payton believes that as well. My main takeaway that I got from his press conference, meeting him, hearing him speak about certain things is, for Denver, it's about putting in the work, right? It's not about documenting the work that you're doing on social media or photographing and videoing everything that you're doing. It's about putting in the work, and then it's about going out there and carrying that over onto the field and letting the results speak for itself rather than just expecting hype. He wants the Broncos to earn the hype, which I tell you what, Sayre, that's refreshing to hear from a guy like Sean Payton, who expressed that the itch, right? The itch that he had to get back to winning was something that was very important for him to leave Fox and come back into the world of coaching.
Right. And along with that mentality, he said, I don't like making predictions, right? But he did say for the fans, what can you expect? Well, he said, I think it's realistic for our fan base to expect a completely different type of culture, which is exactly what you're alluding to there, Cody. And he also said, I think it's realistic for them to expect us to win. That is a realistic expectation. I mean, it's not like he's coming out and saying we're going to win, but fans should expect you to win. If you're going to be coming out there and commanding what the Broncos paid up in a trade, and certainly in a contract, which be very fascinated to find out those details at some point, right, Cody? But I think what the Broncos are paying to get you to come into the building, he understands the pressure and the expectation from the fan base is going to be to win. You're putting your mouth where your money is, right? The Broncos have, they were purchased for $4.65 billion. You spend millions upon millions, hundreds of millions for the quarterback, probably close to $100 million for the head coach. You've got all these different things at play here. And then you talk about the other details, paying for the field, paying for this, paying for that, upgrading the stadium, $100 million there. It's going to be something that, yes, the fans expect victories on the field. Sean Payton understands that. And it's going to be just kind of what does it look like when he says expect a completely different type of culture? Like I alluded to before, he talked about, the size of towels at, with the Saints and things like that, how they changed that up, or getting a $30,000 sound system for like a post-game victory celebration, like all these different little things that add up to change that culture. It's something that like people think, well, the culture with Vic Fangio, it was bad because Vic Fangio was kind of a grouchy guy or like a curmudgeon, like an old curmudgeon. And then Nathaniel Hackett comes in, he changes the culture by being very positive. And Sean Payton's going to come in and change the culture by being more mature and all these. It's more than that, Cody. The culture is winning. Like, what did the players talk about all season long? If we're winning, people would be talking about us way different. That's the culture that I think Sean Payton's talking about, and it starts with those details.
I like details. That I like that you mentioned it because that was legitimately one of the words, the key topics that you mentioned is like the details and everything that we do is important. It all ties to that, right? And to the towels that you mentioned, some people may be listening like, what is he talking about with towels? So, for example, when the Saints had a playoff game, he said he wanted it where there were towels where you can notice it's a distraction, but the towels are too small. You couldn't even twirl it. So he went and said, hey, we got to invest in that. So that makes it, for me, Sean Payton values every detail of how the operation looks. Not even that, but even from the game day operations. And, Damani Leach is someone he name dropped as well, someone he's looking forward to getting to work with. Damani's on top of a lot of the business aspects for the Broncos. So Broncos Country, one thing we're excited to hear about is how you feel about the Broncos' introduction of Sean Payton as their next head coach. We'll also dive into some other things as well in our post-media scrum from Payton's press conference about who he believes should win the Super Bowl this week and maybe changing the perception of how the Broncos are viewed in the AFC West. On top of that, is he a good game manager? You get that and much more in today's episode, Lockdown Broncos. This episode of the show is brought to you by our friends at Built Bar, the best tasting protein bar that is out there on the market today. If you're looking for a delicious treat, but you don't want all the fat and the calories, then you've got to try a Built Bar today. We just got through the holidays, and I know my goal is to set a little bit of, healthy eating habits, but for me, I love protein. I also love chocolate. What if I were to tell you could combine the best of both worlds in one protein bar that's jam-packed with 17 grams of protein, 130 calories, and only 4 grams of sugar with amazing flavors like churro, brownie batter, peanut butter, coconut almond. They have all that at Built.com. Not to mention, you can also go now to your local Walmart or your Sam's Club to get your hands on Built Bar here today. So make sure you check it out. If you want to buy Built Bar in bulk, go to Sam's Club and you can get a box of 13 Built Bars with a wide variety of amazing flavors. Or if you want to go to Walmart and get a 4-pack of your favorite bars, make sure you go do that today. And make sure you thank Lockdown Broncos later. One of the important topics for Broncos fans in the hiring of the next head coach is how they largely view the AFC West. Sean Payton gave us some very interesting nuggets in his Monday introductory press conference in Dove Valley at the UCHealth Training Center. Just want to say thank you so much, Broncos Country, for tuning in and making Lockdown Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. We appreciate you taking time out of your day to listen to Sayre and I talk all things Broncos football. We want you to get involved as always. So if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you comment on the video, like the video as well for the algorithm. Or if you want to interact with us on Twitter, you can always tweet us at Cody Roark NFL, at Sayre Bedinger, at Locked on Broncos. Continuing on here, obviously for Sean Payton, he's now the next head coach of the Denver Broncos. In his introductory press conference, he gave us some details that they're going to work on filling out the coaching staff, but they weren't going to give us any details as to who. That's something we'll focus on tomorrow's episode of the show here. But for the AFC West in particular, right? And remember the narrative, everyone said, why would anyone want to come and coach a team into the AFC West with the Kansas City Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, the Los Angeles Chargers, whatever the hell the Raiders are doing with Josh McDaniels, who knows, we'll have to wait and see. But who wants to go and do that? And Sean Payton, the competitor, he says, me, I'll do it. And on top of that, he also gave a resounding prediction for the Super Bowl this weekend, my friend. And tell you what, I think that right there went over a lot of Broncos fans.
I think that was the one thing that, if anything, really won over the fan base. He was talking about how he's got to finish up his work with Fox, right? He's been working for them in the TV department. Obviously, we've seen him on TV these last handful of weeks talking, about the head coaching process. And he said, I'm picking the Eagles in the Super Bowl. I'm picking the Eagles. And his quote after that is what I think won everybody else over. He said, we never want anyone in our division to win anything. And he went on to describe, Cody, what I would agree completely with him is the perfect weekend for a Broncos fan. Number 1, the Broncos win. Numbers 2, 3, and 4, the Chiefs, Chargers, and the Raiders all lose. that's the ideal weekend for the Denver Broncos fan. I know you and I have come across a number of people, bless their hearts, who think it's better if for the Broncos, for some reason, if the rest of the AFC West is winning, as though if the Chiefs are winning, we're winning. That's not the case. We want them to lose all the time. I think I speak for hopefully mostly everybody in that regard, but I love that Sean Payton said that. That's a far cry, very different from, remember the podcast that we did when Nathaniel Hackett was still the head coach, coming up to that first meeting against the Chiefs, where he kind of, almost blew it off as just any other game, right? And that was really frustrating to hear, because if nothing else, that could have been the Broncos Super Bowl last year, beating the Chiefs. They came close a couple times, obviously, but close doesn't mean anything in the NFL. So Sean Payton gets it. You love to see that. You love to hear it. And it was just a great mentality for him. We know the whole orange tie thing. We've talked about that as well. When he wore an orange tie on Fox, I love a good friend, George Stoya, asked him that question, and he confirmed it was, it did mean something. It wasn't just a coincidence that he was wearing an orange tie on the air, Cody. So you love the little subtle jabs at the division rivals, not so subtle jabs at the division rivals, and also the subtle, kind of hints like, I want to be a Bronco, when he's still, not even officially hired yet.
Well, and the thing that he said, too, in Broncos Country, here's what he said. I'm picking the Eagles. We never want anyone in our division to win anything. That is a good mentality. That is something I'm excited to, once we get closer to the next season, when we know when the Broncos are going to play some AFC West division rivals, I'm sure there's going to be some questions that are going to set him up. I know he's not going to give any bulletin board material. He doesn't believe in that type of stuff, but I'm curious to hear his thoughts on how everything plays out. And on top of that, too, I will say it is interesting. He was asked a question about Russell Wilson and, having his own quarterback coach in the building. And he did say, that's foreign to me. That's not going to happen while I'm here, so it's going to be Sean Payton's way or no way, and it's being able to create a new culture, and when you have a new head coach, there is a new culture that guys have to buy into right now. While I think that the locker room is very tightly knit, intact, they're all supportive of one another, things do change in some facets when you introduce a brand new head coach, and I'm excited to see how Sean Payton's going to be able to kind of piece things together. I know I'm going to be sitting down with Emmanuel Sanders a little bit later on this week in Phoenix at Radio Row, and I plan on asking him about his time in New Orleans with a guy like Sean Payton and what it maybe means for guys like Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, Tim Patrick, guys he's close with as well from a receiver standpoint, and maybe what they can expect out of the offensive side of the ball. I'm excited about that, but one thing that Broncos Country wants to know, is Sean Payton a good game manager? He was asked this, and, with full confidence, he said, absolutely I am.
He said, in jest, of course, and I know this is kind of a deep cut here, but he said, I don't anticipate the crowd having to count down the 30-second clock, right? So we all know what that's about. The crowd is counting down the play clock as the Broncos were struggling with the delay of game penalties early on in the season before Jerry Rosburg had to come in and take over game management. So Sean Payton obviously prides himself on being a good game manager. As he said, his background as a quarterback helped, obviously a wealth of experience, 15 years as a head coach. So that helps as well, Cody. And for those that were wondering, he was asked to, him and the whole panel, George Paton, Greg Penner, about the rumors. Did the Broncos make a last-second push for DeMeco Ryans? And he had a pretty great zinger about that one as well when he said, I don't know if DeMeco, he must have been on the phone with Lewis Hamilton or something, because I was on the phone with these guys, meaning George Paton and Greg Penner, the whole time. So you love the attitude that he brought to the table there. Just a very alpha, type of mentality, very confident and poised. And so it was a fun press conference, and he had fun with it. Obviously, he spends quite a bit of time where we all do on Twitter as well, because he was not unaware of a lot of these references and things that people were talking about.
And I like that, too, because I think for him, he even expressed that he wants to be better this time around interacting with media. His first time in New Orleans, he said he always has this, a reputation of being this tough and, tyrant guy, as he alluded to. But he said, I'm looking forward to working with all of you and getting to know us, which I think that's exciting, because I feel like you have to have that type of relationship, because then you understand maybe why he coaches certain ways that he does right on the field, or maybe you see a process play out. And then, post-game, you're sitting there and you're at the press conference, you're like, oh, you know what? Knowing how he is, this makes sense as to, maybe how this happened or how this happened. to me, I'm looking forward to getting to know Sean Payton a little bit more and bringing that experience here to the avid listeners of Locked On Broncos, folks. And just want to say thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode of the show. We'll be around all week long. I'm getting ready to head out to Phoenix for Super Bowl Radio Row, so Sayre and I will have different times. We'll sit down to interview and get a brand new episode of Locked On Broncos up and running. But what you can expect on tomorrow's episode of the show, the Broncos do have a new offensive line coach. It is official, as Sean Payton is making some staff changes and bringing people on, and certain coaches from the old regime are departing. We'll dive into that and much more in tomorrow's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.